Chapter 4. I stared at the boy for about 5 seconds, which is 4 seconds longer than normal boys will make eye contact with a stranger. His outstretched hand beckoning me from the minivan, I looked out at the complete darkness beyond the dome light above me. What the hell? I slid out of the seat and reached for the boy with my own shaking hand. The door slammed and total darkness once again started suffocating me. After a few steps, I felt the boy stop in front of me, and I noticed faint voices could be heard from somewhere close. They were not happy. A vertical beam of light formed right in front of me as a door opened, revealing a large open room with several angry people. Standing right in the center was Gladys. "In case you haven't noticed, Gladys," said an angry middle-aged man in a suit and tie, "we are losing people fast because we act recklessly. Bringing a stranger into a safe house is totally—"
"Reckless, I know," Gladys cut him off, "but my hand was forced. The girl is becoming aware of us."
"Ahem," came a voice from behind them. In the corner there was a shabby, oversized chair that held a tiny old woman. With a gentle smile on her face, she just stared at me, standing in the doorway. All the others turned and looked at me. I felt like I was on stage and forgot my lines, each second bringing more awkward tension. I took the opportunity to quickly look around and try and get my bearings. The room was a converted flat of an old factory with high 12-foot ceilings and an openness that is somehow inviting. A kitchen was at the far end, probably 60 feet away, and there were several arrangements of couches and chairs in different sections. There were track lights arranged on the ceiling so that areas of the big expanse were dimly lit, with one corner on the far side totally black. The floor was a patchwork of various carpets and throw rugs. And even though I was sure the building had windows on the outside, there were no windows on the inside. My first thought was, what a great party room. But this definitely didn't seem like a party. In fact, the angry businessman looked like he was about to pop a blood vessel or crack a tooth from over clenching his jaw. He had perfectly combed jet black hair and a Hollywood square jaw. His perfectly pressed dress shirt and pants were in perfect harmony with his striped tie and cufflinks. Also in the room, seated in various chairs, were 4 other people that spanned every genre of life. An elderly Asian man who stood about 4 feet tall, I guessed, with thick square glasses, was seated to the left of the elderly woman. He looked bored with all this and just tired. A pretty redhead was sitting on the floor cross-legged, picking uncomfortably at the patterned throw rug, clearly not pleased with the situation. She looked to be in her early 30s, and I found myself instinctively looking for a wedding ring. Some habits are just automatic, what can I say? Across from her, sitting on the couch with his back to me, was a black guy who looked to be late for a drug deal or an inner-city gang war. Stereotype? Probably. But he glared over the back of the couch at me and had a Rolex watch showing. Not bad for a 20-year-old kid. I'm sure he got that bagging groceries just like I did when I was 20. Actually, considering what I shelled out for school loans, I could have bought several Rolex watches. Whatever, he was definitely not thrilled with my presence. And next to him on the couch, grinning from ear to ear, was a shabby-looking boy with gray eyes and one hand. Wait a minute. Damn, the kid snuck away from me and I'm standing alone. Now I'm starting to sweat. 7 people all paused and stared intently at yours truly. I think there's been a mistake. Perhaps we should just go." "Thanks, Gladys." "Now, where's the effing door?" No one said anything as I looked around and quickly saw that there was no door. Just the one to the pitch-black garage. Can you say fire code violation? Gladys looked about to cry as her gaze swept from person to person in the room, most choosing to look away rather than meet her icy glare. Finally, she looked to the old woman in the back. Everyone lifted their heads as if judgment was about to be passed. She simply nodded and the smile slid off her face. Gladys looked back at me with tears in her eyes. I felt like someone who had just been given the bad news and had 2 weeks to live. Hey, wait a minute. What was just decided here? I started to panic a little, like maybe they weren't just kicking me out.
"Come on, Finn. I'll take you home,"
Gladys said in a whisper, walking back to me in the doorway. I scanned the room one more time and saw each person staring at me as though they were torn, scared for me to stay, sad to see me go. Each one's eyes met mine, the redhead, the Asian, the gangbanger, the businessman. the old lady, and finally the kid. But the kid didn't look torn. No, he was just pissed. As I turned toward the door, he jumped to his feet, standing on the couch, and through clenched teeth, he said in a low, fierce tone, "I said no!" I looked back at him, and to my surprise, tears were streaking down his cheeks, and it seemed that I could almost see his breath as he spoke the words. Before I could take another step to the door, a huge, deep, rumbling growl filled the room. Everyone's head snapped to the dark corner where the sound originated. I saw the eyes first. From the darkness came a huge black figure. My brain shuddered as I tried to process what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was a black lion had just materialized from the darkness. But as it lumbered across the large room, I realized it was the biggest dog I'd ever seen, easily 200 pounds. But it was hard to tell from the thick, long fur covering the canine monster. The beast of a dog came directly to me, and I nearly lost bladder control. Instinctively, I stepped away from the door, trying to retreat. Now, I know that people say you should never run away from an advancing dog because it is naturally programmed to chase, but I don't think they have ever been pursued by a dog like this. Holding your ground is just not an option. The dog came directly between me and the door and simply sat and looked back at the boy. I quickly scanned the room, looking for someone to take control of the dog so I could get out of this fire trap. The redhead was covering her mouth with her hands, Hollywood was putting on his suit coat, and the Asian was still looking bored, like he was calculating quantum physics in his mind. The gangster looked like he was trying to equally hard not to soil himself. Only the old woman's reaction was a total surprise to me. She was walking straight to me, the smile back on her face.
"Come on, Finn. Let's talk a while."
She reached out her hand, and I took it. In the real world, clearly Hollywood was in charge, but in this room, little Mother Teresa called the shots. Her hand was soft and cold, like a grandmother, and I instantly felt more at ease.
"And thank you, Daniel," she said to the boy. "Please, go give Shadrach a treat."
We walked to the kitchen area, and everyone pretended to act nonchalant and go about their business. The lights brightened as we walked into that area of the room, probably from motion sensors, very modern for a flat on the rough side of town. She motioned to a stool beside a covered table, and I sat as she moved to the stove and put some water on.
"Do you drink tea?"
Tea probably wouldn't fix how messed up this situation was. "Do you have anything stronger? Scotch, maybe?" To my surprise, she flashed a big smile and chuckled, then shut off the stove. She reached up to the cabinet above the stove and pulled out a bottle of 18-year Glenlivet. Hey, it's noon on Saturday. Nothing wrong with starting early. She put 2 glasses on the table and poured 2 fingers in each glass.
"What are we drinking to, Finn?"
"To Gladys and her good judgment." And I raised my glass. Might as well highlight the obvious. Again, the old lady laughed. At least she had a good sense of humor. We clinked glasses and took a solid sip. Nice.
"My name is Antonella Brunetti, but everyone calls me Nella."
"Interesting name. Is that Irish?" I asked in my usual sarcastic tone with the requisite half smirk. She laughed. "Too bad there isn't a piano around. I know some killer Italian stuff, Nella." She gave me a strange look and gently patted the covered table we were leaning on. I took a step back, and to my surprise, the table was actually a baby grand piano, with the key side pushed up against the wall so it looked like a table. Still, now that I was looking at it, I was surprised I didn't see it before. She was clearing off the vase of flowers, and I helped her gather the long cloth covering. Sure enough, it was a beautiful old baby grand. I pulled the piano away from the wall and found a chair to use as a bench. In my head, I was already going through a few Busoni songs I knew. Thank you, Mrs. Giovanni. The piano was a little out of tune, but not so bad that the songs were unrecognizable. Naturally, everyone else in the room started to gravitate over to the general area. Everyone except Hollywood. He apparently already left for a big important board meeting where some hapless mom-and-pop company was being absorbed in the corporate conglomerate of consumerism. Probably. After Busoni, I shifted into something a little more modern with Billy Joel, of course. Gladys actually started singing, and Red, the redhead, joined in. I let the song wind down, and immediately everyone broke into applause, even the one-handed kid. I think there's a bad joke in there somewhere, but it didn't seem the least bit awkward to him. Thanks. Great piano, Nella. I missed playing on a grand. Nella was sipping on her scotch, and everyone seemed to be waiting for her to say something. Perfect time to have some scotch myself. Nella finally seemed satisfied that the proper amount of silence had been observed for effect, and cleared her throat.
I'm sure you have some questions, Finn.
You bet I do. I jumped in, feeling the warmth of the scotch hitting my empty stomach with a little jolt of courage. Why does everyone know who I am? And, what's with the drama over me being here? How about, why are you all hiding out here? That got a few raised eyebrows. Perhaps most importantly, I looked down at the boy. What on earth do you feed that giant dog?
Oh, he eats anything, he replied with a smile. But he prefers piano players.
Everyone laughed, so I thought I should laugh too. But just in case, I kept an eye on the lion.
Finn, I think we should get to the point and cut the crap, Nella broke in. We are, unfortunately, very short on time, and I think you can take it if I am very blunt with you.
I swallowed hard, wondering if this was some kind of weird intervention orchestrated by my ex-girlfriend. She was a bit of the religious nut, so this might be right up her alley.
You possess a power within you that is greater than you can possibly imagine. It is called the power of creation, and you've already started using it.
I let the silence linger a bit. Yep, creepy intervention. I slammed the last of the scotch and waited a few more seconds for my ex to jump out. Any second they would pull out a Bible. Gladys spoke next.
Finn, you need to take this seriously. The problem is that you've already started using the power and drawing attention from the fallen. Your life is in danger.
I'm sorry, everybody, but I think you're going to need to do a little better than that. I know you're all trying to help, and I made the air quote signs with my hands, but I don't need any intervention. My life is just fine. I turned to the empty glass on the piano and twisted in the chair to stand up. Without warning, the folding chair decided to revert back to its folded position, and I awkwardly lost my balance. Reaching for some solid leverage, my hand hit the glass off the edge of the piano, and the room filled with the piercing shatter of glass. Damn it! Sorry, let me help clean this up. I'd like to think I can blame my clumsiness on the crappy chair, but I was already feeling the scotch, and I know I'm less than graceful. I felt a gentle hand on my arm as Nella held me in place.
Lexi, if you don't mind, she said to the redhead.
At least now I have a name to go with the ringless finger. Definitely no ring. Lexi had a slight smirk on her face as she took a deep breath. Holding her hands in front of her with fingers spread, she closed her eyes and took several slow breaths. Just when I thought things had taken every crazy turn possible, my sense of crazy got redefined. Lexi's eyes snapped open, and I felt a swirling wind around my feet. I could hear the wind whipping, but only felt it at my feet, and that's when the pieces of glass started to swirl and lift off the floor, spinning into a loose vortex. Not 3 feet in front of me, every piece of glass that was previously spread across the entire floor was rising up in a lifelike tornado. The loose spinning cloud of glass started to condense and form a ball. The wind blowing, but only surrounding the glass. Nella reached out with her cupped hands, and the sphere settled gently in them. After several breaths, the wind stopped, and the sphere, which had been as big as a softball, constricted into a tight ball and rotated slowly. Piece by piece, the glass literally regrew right in her hands. I felt like I was watching a movie backwards. After just a few seconds, the entire glass was reformed, with the cracks still showing. Nella picked up the cracked glass and held it up to her lips and gently blew. As if blowing sand off a table, the cracks vanished. She set the glass back on the piano and poured another 2 fingers.
Oh, silly me. I apologize. I forgot to ask you, Finn, if you would like it on the rocks or not. Do you like ice?
No words. No words could form after witnessing that bit of magic. No sorcery. I just nodded. With a smile, Nella took her finger and dipped it in my glass. Instantly, a large ice cube formed. My mind was trying to figure out whether to panic or investigate. Normally, the curiosity of my scientific mind would win out the day, but after what I just witnessed, I was leaning heavily towards the panic option.
Have a drink, Finn. Your world's about to get a whole lot bigger,
said a voice behind me that I knew was Gladys. I felt all the eyes in the room on me as I looked down at the drink in my hands, swirling the ice chunk. But how do I know she washed her hands? I asked with a smirk towards the old lady across from me. She laughed hard and licked off her finger. I can appreciate a good sense of humor, so I took a drink. Still tasted like scotch, so I took another as well. How about you explain your little parlor trick and we take this really slow? I'm going to go ahead and try not to be too freaked out here. Of course, I promise nothing.
You go ahead and panic. That would be normal response, I think. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? All the stories you've heard about creation, the Bible, religion, God, the angels, and even the devils are all half-truths. Of course, most people don't believe that the world was created in 7 days, or that the earth was flooded and that life exterminated except for the inhabitants of the ark. But there is truth behind these stories. When God created life, it was with the greatest effort, and it took an enormous team that helped him. The angels, God's closest companions, were all given the power of creation to assist in the construction of the world. So far, so good?
I nodded. Nothing too controversial so far. God, angels, creation power, all kind of fits the whole theology thing. Not really my cup of tea, or scotch, but some people make a pretty good living spouting this crap. I'm more interested in the parlor trick at this point.
The power of creation is exactly what it sounds like. The ability to create or manipulate matter just with your will. Now, God's will is pure love. So when he shared his power with his closest friends, the angels, he did so completely and freely, with no limitations, no reservations. However, there were 2 things that happened unexpectedly. The first was that God did not anticipate that his friends, his most loved partners in creation, would fall under the age-old paradigm. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Over some time, many of the angels began to defy God and started distorting creation for their own purposes. God did the only thing he could. He cut them off from the power. The angels did not realize that the power had limits or that it could run out. It turns out that God had been allowing his power to just flow freely to them, so he just turned off the flow. The fallen angels did not even realize they had been cut off, till one by one their power started to fail. Widespread panic ensued among the fallen angels as they resorted to all manners of desperation, like a rich kid living off his parents' trust fund that suddenly gets cut off. Suddenly, these rich kid angels that never had to worry about how to exist or the possibility of being powerless had to survive on their own. Naturally, one angel was far more cunning and calculated than the rest, Lucifer. And it is true that he was the closest to the Creator, and thus the greatest source of the painful betrayal. He coordinated the fallen into an angry and focused army. All the remaining powers were conserved in preparation for a final battle. In the meantime, they were banished from entering eternity, and thus trapped to exist on earth, living among us.
Okay, now we have entered new theological territory. You mean to tell me that the devil is somewhere out there? I asked, pointing to where I thought the windows should be. Just walking around talking to people and buying groceries and drinking coffee.
Supposedly, none of us have ever met him, that we know of anyway. And don't forget his other fallen angels, demons really. No one really knows how many there are.
I did my best to look both scared and concerned. In reality, this was all bullshit, and I wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of here. Trying not to sound too disrespectful or arrogant, I did drink her expensive scotch. I tried to end the tutorial and be on my way. Nella, thank you for the scotch and the entertainment, but I'm afraid I need to be going. No need to give me a ride, Gladys. I can flag a cab. I found it interesting that I would rather take my chances in the slums of Philadelphia than stay in this room with religious nuts. Nella smiled and then laughed.
If you think Daniel and his Shadrach will let you out, then help yourself.
My gaze drifted over to the giant mound of black fur in front of the door.
Just hear me out, Finn. and then we'll be happy to take you anywhere you want to go. I know we sound crazy. I thought the same thing at first, until my eyes were opened."
I sat back down and eyed the bottle of scotch and decided against it. I was already buzzing, and my empty stomach wasn't helping anything. My nerves get really quite short when I get hungry. Before I could say anything, out of the kitchen area walked Red. What was her name again? I think it rhymed with sexy.
"Let's talk after some snacks. Thanks, Lexi," said Nella, reaching for the plate of sandwiches.
"Yes, thanks, Lexi. I knew it rhymed." Lexi smiled and locked my gaze for a second. I'm glad I chose that particular second to actually be looking at her eyes. I'm usually pretty good about wandering eyes, but scotch makes me a little more carefree than normal. She finally spoke.
"I think you should stay a few more minutes. If what Gladys said is true, then you probably won't get a chance to come back."
Now, I'm a bit of a softy for requests from pretty redheads. Of course, brunettes and blondes are equally important. I guess I'm not exactly picky. Like I said, I prefer the shallow end of the pool. The sandwich was a bologna and cheese, probably what I would have gotten back at my apartment anyway, so I didn't really have anything to complain about. Nella skipped the sandwich break and kept on with her intervention speech. I now realized that the lunch break was just a stall tactic, so they could get me to listen a while longer.
"Finn, the most important part of the story is still coming. The Creator still needed the angels to assist in creation, and now there was a large and powerful army of fallen angels to contend with. Furthermore, the angels had proven to be untrustworthy, with so many, over half, joining their forces with Lucifer. So with the fallen banished, God decided to give the power of creation to us, his children, humans." She paused for several seconds to let the words sink in.
I realized that I was almost frozen in the shock of her words, dumbfounded, with a full bite of bologna sandwich that I was struggling to chew. The eyes of everyone in the room weighed heavily on me, almost burning. Then I heard a chuckle from behind me, and I spun to see Daniel trying desperately to keep from laughing with both hands over his mouth. Well, one hand anyway. "So funny, Daniel." I had to break the tension somehow. These ideas were really unbelievable, but clearly everyone believed them. The smile quickly dropped from his face as Daniel made eye contact with Nella. She had a disapproving motherly glare on her face.
Well,"
the words stumbling out of his mouth.
"I just love this part."
"And what part is that, Danny boy?" I immediately regretted asking.
"The part where you think we're all crazy, and then the part where you realize that we're not, and your life has changed forever."
"Oh, so I'm the crazy one, huh?"
"Huh?"
He laughed.
"Yes, you're the crazy one. You'll see, life is better knowing the truth."
"Thank you, Daniel," Nella said firmly, reestablishing control of the conversation.
"Finn, do you mind telling me about your mother?"
The hair stood on the back of my neck. People that knew me knew better than to bring up my mother in general conversation. I think Gladys saw the fire starting in my eyes because she quickly jumped.
"Finn, I told them about your mother. Made a miraculous recovery from cancer after the doctors had given up hope."
My blood pressure was still elevated, but a tiny voice in the back of my head, or maybe my heart, wanted to know what my mother had to do with this. "Yes," I replied in a level tone. "She was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer, and the doctor said that she had less than a month to live. They tried to operate and remove the tumor on her pancreas, but additional tumors were detected on her ovaries, bladder, lymph nodes. In reality, a month would have been a small miracle. They set her up with pain meds and hospice care, and everybody flew in from around the country to be there and say goodbye. A week later, everyone else was gone, back home and on with their lives, and I was there helping her with everything till it became too much and they moved her to the hospice wing of the hospital. They gave her a couple days because the cancer had moved to her lungs and possibly her brain. She lost the ability to speak coherently, possibly because she was so heavily medicated, of course. My sister, who lives in town, spent the entire week calling on her entire Facebook and online friend network to pray for a miracle, and sure enough, she started to come back from the edge. At first, it was just barely noticeable because she wasn't hitting the morphine button as much, Then she started speaking normally again and walking around. The doctors were shocked, but were still convinced that this was just a blip on an inevitable path that ends the way all these things do. So, long story short, she continued to recover, really quickly actually, and went home the next week. 2 weeks later, they did a full scan and found all the tumors gone. Complete recovery. Miracle, right? I found myself instinctively reaching for the scotch bottle. The bologna needed a little lubrication.
What do you attribute her miraculous recovery to, Finn?
I watched the scotch swirl in my glass and realized the room was so quiet I could hear the beast breathing across the room. I think it's obvious, isn't it? My sister and her cohorts finally hit the magic number of prayers, and the Almighty God took notice and pity on us poor souls. I mean, Kira, my sister, proclaimed victory online, and it seemed as though the entire world was regurgitating the magnificence and mercy of a loving God. So, there it is. Just get enough petitions together in the form of prayer, and your problems will be solved. But don't forget, I get some credit too. I said my share of prayers. My sarcasm was running fairly unchecked, and I found that I did not care. Fuck these religious nuts. I need to get out of here. Nella leaned forward and asked,
"Why are you so angry and full of doubt? Isn't it possible that prayer saved your mother?"
The fire exploded in my head. I found myself automatically standing. Because everyone in the hospice wing of the hospital died. Every one of them had people praying for them, and my mother was the only one to recover. But that doesn't really matter, does it? Do you know why? My voice had gone from near yelling to a fierce whisper.
"Yes,"
Nella said immediately, looking down at her hand.
"I know what happened next. But I need to focus on how your mother recovered from cancer when no one else did. Obviously, you don't think it was your sister's mountain of prayers, and neither do I."
I felt the fire burning in my eyes as I fought the tears. After weeks of daily tears, I told myself that I was done with crying. I don't understand. What are you saying then?
"Although I could be wrong, I would bet that the thousands of prayers and mountains of positive thought did almost nothing to save your mother from the brink of death. I think you did it."
No offense, lady, but you don't even know me.
"Tell me about the last night you spent in the hospital before she started to recover. I think you left out some details."
Of all the things I wanted to do right now, rehashing that entire experience was at the bottom of the list. One swallow of scotch still rocked at the bottom of my glass. What the hell? I downed the last of the courage elixir and thought back to that night. Well, my mother, in her drug-induced state, asked me to play piano for her. At that point, I was fairly tired of praying and was glad to do something else useful. I brought in the old piano, then had it wheeled to her room. I'm a little surprised Gladys let me through. Gladys smirked nervously.
"I must have been on break or something."
I started playing for her. You know, it's a magic piano with super healing powers. Nella ignored my question.
"Tell me what was going through your mind when you played for your mother."
Nothing really. I was just concentrating on getting the song right.
"I doubt that, Finn. Tell me, what song?"
Beethoven, Moonlight Sonata.
"How many people were in the room?"
2, me and my mother.
"Were your eyes open or closed?"
Closed.
"What were you really focused on?"
I had never spoken about these details to anyone before, mostly because they didn't matter, but also because this was personal. I don't remember.
"Liar. Tell me."
Nella had a touch of anger in her voice. Fine. I was thinking about the tumors. I was just picturing them falling apart and dying. Nella let my last line linger in the air like she had just found the jewels she was looking for.
"Please, tell me about the pictures you imagined."
Her voice had returned to the soft grandmother tone. Well, actually I'm a chemist, so I spend a great deal of time drawing molecules and imagining bond angles forming and breaking, with the addition of reactants. I was picturing the chemical bonds of the molecules breaking apart. I don't expect you to understand. It just seemed to make sense to me. I knew it, came that voice behind me in a whisper. I looked back at Daniel, and he just grinned back at me, like he really did know something I didn't. Gladys stood up and pointed at Nella.
You see, I told you he was the key.
Nella held a hand up for her to stop, and to my utter amazement, she did.
Finn, did you know that our modest hospital has the highest cancer recovery rates in the entire nation right now?
I shrugged.
And people are actually coming here rather than the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota?
You sure it isn't some of the new chemo treatment or something?
Nella shook her head. Let me explain more, Finn. Remember when I said the Creator gave the power of creation to all the people rather than the angels?
I nodded cautiously.
Well, he did so with a safeguard in place. The power of creation can only be tapped into by using the essence of the Creator himself.
The blank stare on my face appropriately conveyed my confusion and disbelief.
The Creator is faith, hope, love, joy. Anytime you tap into these sources, you are pulling from the Creator, and you can use the power of creation. I don't expect you to believe me, but your love for your mother enabled you to destroy the cancer within her.
Deep breaths, Finn. You know how crazy you sound, right, Nella?
She laughed. Yes, I know. But you need to consider what I'm saying. Think about all the people in the world spending all their time praying for a better world when actually they have the power to make the world whatever they want. That's the big irony. People need to stop asking God for a cure and start curing it themselves. Think about how some of the stories you've heard about mothers with superhuman strength that were able to lift a car off their child to save them. You're a scientist. Tell me, how's that possible?
I knew she was right. The reality of the physics required to lift a car is beyond the human construction. Literally, there is not enough muscle fiber or ligament strength to lift a car. The mother's muscles would have torn apart, bones would have broken, and tendons would have snapped like rubber bands if the weight of the car was applied to her arms and back in a lifting motion. But the truth of the matter was that humans have repeatedly done amazing acts of strength in situations of extreme duress. All understandable, even with the swirling theories of adrenaline overload, these were just miraculous events. There I go using that word again. Nella took my silence as capitulation.
Then you agree that miraculous things can happen. You just need some convincing that the miracles can originate from you, right?
Sure, Nella. Convince me.
Very well, then. I have a request for you, piano man.
Nella slowly stood and walked over to me with an unsteady shuffle that octogenarians perform every time they have sat for too long and tightened up. She held out her hand.
Do you have a picture in your wallet? I'd like to see it.
She asked the question as if she already knew the answer. Of course, I did have a picture of my mother that was taken at her cancer recovery party, the last time I saw her. How did you know I had a real picture in my wallet instead of just on my phone like everyone else? Nella just smiled back. I reached in my wallet and pulled out the picture, slightly tattered and faded. Nella took the photo and looked at it for several seconds. She nodded, and without warning, tore the picture into 4 pieces. A stabbing feeling hit my heart and rage filled my mind. I jumped to my feet and slammed my hand on the piano, making everyone in the room jump. "What the hell?" I said in a loud and flat tone. Without emotion, fear, or malice, Nella simply slid the 4 pieces onto the piano in front of me.
Please sit down, Finn. I need to show you what you can do.
The pieces in front of me, my blood boiling, I noticed my hands were shaking. It wasn't the fact that the picture was destroyed. I could print another one. It was the act of the destruction, the tearing apart of a symbol so precious to me. I did not sit.
I know you're angry about that, Finn. This is difficult even for people that are trained, but I believe you have more natural ability than anyone I've met. You can fix the picture with the creation power within you. Please, won't you sit?
My fuse was almost exhausted. This is the last game. Then I'm done with this shit, I said to myself out loud. Okay, I'm sitting. Now what?
Why don't you play that Beethoven song for us?
Nope, was my immediate response. In fact, I responded so quickly that I could see Nella was taken aback. Not that song.
Okay, How about something else that means a great deal to you? Something you can play easily that connects with your core?
Well, that rules out my country music repertoire. I scanned my fairly expansive mental library, and nothing really stuck out. I rubbed my eyes as the scotch was still working its magic.
How about Danny Boy?
Came a voice behind me. I looked over my shoulder at Daniel, still standing on the couch, obviously excited for unknown reasons. Nella shook her head at him and gave him a disparaging look for the interruption. Looks like Danny Boy it is, I said to the grumpy old bat. She gave me a tight smile, recognizing that I was not enthusiastic about this game. I started playing, and the sound was great on that big baby grand. After the first verse, I saw Nella slide the 4 pieces of the torn picture directly in front of me. I missed a few notes.
Stop concentrating on the music and focus on the picture, Nella said. See the picture in your whole mind. Focus on the meaning of the picture, the connection it has with your core. Now close your eyes.
I felt myself following her instructions, and a sense of calm spread over me, like often happens when I'm playing.
Now see the picture whole in your mind. See the torn edges of the pieces come together. See the molecules reattach, the broken fibers becoming one.
The sound of the piano became fuller, as though I had moved into an empty concert hall, and I saw in my mind the pieces coming together and mending, piece by piece, fiber by fiber. My hands continued to move over the notes, as though they knew just where to go. My eyes naturally slid open a crack, and I panicked. The photo was floating several inches above the piano where they had been piled, but the picture was whole. But that wasn't the freaky part. Everyone around me seemed to be moving in slow motion, with a dull glow coming from their faces, and I could see my breath. I sucked in a fast breath and jerked my hands away from the piano. Instantly, everyone returned to normal, and the photo floated to the floor. The eyes of everyone on the room became heavy on me. Sliding the chair back from the piano, I slowly got to my feet. To my surprise, not only did the effects of the scotch appear to be totally absent, but I suddenly felt exceptionally good, like I had just taken a long, restful sleep. The faces in the room were a mixture between excitement and shock. Finally, someone spoke. "Damn, dude, that was for real," said the gangster thug. Apparently, he was actually paying attention to the show, though something tells me he did not know the words to the song. Daniel had rushed over and picked up the picture at my feet and handed it to me. The tattered edges were gone, and it looked like a brand new picture, not something that had been in and out of my wallet 100 times. And it was cold, like it was just taken out of the freezer. Just like the scotch glass, the picture had been perfectly reassembled. My brain went through the logical possibilities of how Nella could have done a switch on me. The picture definitely felt different, showing no signs of wear. I quickly flipped it over and saw my handwriting on the back. June 14, Cancer Kicker Party. Nella stood and collected the glass and plates off the piano and started bringing them back to the kitchen. "Wait, explain." "I'd love to, Finn, but let's face it. You're the one who did it. I just gave you the motivation and a little push. Besides, I've done enough talking here. My job is to make sure you take the first step, and my boy, you are indeed everything they said you were. My apologies for not believing in you sooner. I am grateful they didn't get a chance to restart you." With that, Nella motioned for Lexi, and they then shuffled into the kitchen. My attention was pulled to the small boy hopping in front of me excitedly. "Can I see it? Is it perfect? Did they get it perfect on the first try? No way! No one gets it on the first try." He pulled the picture out of my hands and examined it thoroughly. "Did you feel how cool it was? Pretty awesome, if you ask me. That happens when you use the power. They call it endothermic, or something like that." "Do you mean endothermic?" I said, feeling my chemistry roots come to life. "Sure, whatever. I don't really care about that stuff. I'm more of an animal person," Daniel shot back with a smile. Clearly, I had achieved some kind of celebrity status with him. "Can someone please tell me how all this happened?" I had a sinking feeling they weren't kidding about this power of creation, and that my life was about to take a dramatic turn toward the weird.